Hi, I'm Svitek, 360 Creative Coach, and welcome to my blog where it is both my mission and my simultaneous pleasure to highlight my creative journey in hopes of inspiring you and giving you specific takeaway, all with the intention to make your journey at least a little bit easier. Now, before I fully dive into everything, I would love to invite you to subscribe if you haven't already. That way you get all the various lessons and episodes that I put out right when I put them out. Thank you if you just did, and thank you if you already were. It truly does mean a lot to me, as I hope it does to you. So, let's get into things. Big tectonic shifts in terms of my latest film project, which is the 2D animated The Arbiters. And so to break it down, basically in mid-May, we have a slew of several important meetings to take the project from development to pre-production, hopefully. And also then in June, there's a big Annecy Film Festival as well as market that we're planning to attend. So those are kind of like the big deadlines that are approaching. And that has been exciting. It served as motivation to kickstart the project back into not life. It's always had life, but really there's an excitement level there, and we're building towards something. Now, the things that we're literally building, well, we continue to revise the script, which you've probably heard me say ad nauseum if you're a regular listener of my vlogs. However, if anything, it just goes to show the level of importance and how many revisions will go through with the story. So as of right now, my writing partner, John Comerford, he did a pass of the script. Then I received it last week, and I went through it and built upon what he had done. And part of it was answering certain questions that he might have had that he couldn't find a solution for because he didn't know the intention of something. And then other times it was like, okay, taking something, and it's about finessing the ending. Now, the interesting part is, for the most part, one of the goals that we're trying to achieve is we have the mechanics of the story. We know what needs to happen, but we want to make the emotion really resonate in the scenes that need it, right? And so there's a scene in the beginning, there's a scene kind of in the middle that's supposed to be very emotional, and then, of course, the ending really is supposed to hinge on nothing but emotion. And there's a part in the middle, not the emotional part necessarily, but a part in the middle where a character learns something. And as I was writing it, it's always been a scene to kind of help answer some questions about the world and things of that nature. And in this pass, it just really hit me that perhaps it doesn't need that. I could be wrong. But what it needs is more of an explanation and a examination at the history of one of the characters as opposed to the history of the world. And by doing that, it helps inform one of the protagonists and then be able to make a decision towards the end of the movie, the climax. So whether or not it works, I don't know, but overall, it was one of the quickest revisions I did, and actually had quite a few changes. But I think it speaks to the idea of how much better I am as a writer. And also this notion that you never really learn to write. You learn to write the story that you're trying to tell. And so I'm learning to tell the story of the Arbiters. So I sent that back to John for his pass, and what's going to happen is he's going to, make his revisions. I'm going to get him back, approve or reject certain notions. Usually I approve, and then we're going to send it to the rest of the team, and then have a writer's room and things of that nature to sculpt it even further before these meetings take place. Now, the tricky part of all of this is that there's various elements that we're also working on that the team needs to, kind of be in the know about, but we want to save them the script so we have a fresher perspective. So that's been an interesting challenge. Of course, they've read early drafts of the script, but while the core still remains the same, certain elements have changed and things like that. And what we're preparing for these May meetings are what we're calling art boards. I haven't thought of a better term for it, but there's essentially 3 different elements to the movie as far as visuals. And so we want to represent each one specifically. And so that's what we're working on, and we picked various things. And funny enough, for one of the panels, once I had done like a sketch, like a storyboard sketch of what that panel would look like, and upon seeing it, the team was like, okay, we like this, we appreciate the chaotic nature, but potentially anyone who sees this could think that the movie is headed towards a different direction, like basically false marketing. A lot of times, let's say you see a trailer and it tells you one thing, but then when you see the movie, it's completely another thing, something akin to that. And we didn't want to do that. And so we still wanted to capture the spirit of like this chaos and action, but we last minute pivoted to a different part of the script that has elements that don't lead it down a false narrative, perhaps. So there's that element of it. And then the other element of it is, as we present the story to new people, whoever they may be, studios, actors, things of that nature, while we can work on the pitch side of it, meaning the verbal version, funny enough, I was watching behind the scenes of The Lion King, and they talked about how they, one of the things Walt Disney was famous for was having story rooms where everything was presented via storyboards. So it's got visual components, and that's how you show everybody like how you pitch the story. And of course, this is not something new. Ultimately, the Matrix in particular, Warner Brothers had bought the script based on the script, but to really get it made, took the Wachowskis to create these really incredible storyboards, and that's what they presented, and that's what really gave Warner Brothers the confidence of like, okay, this could be a good movie. So we're kind of putting ourselves in a similar position where why not make it more engaging, make it more dynamic, and paint a literal picture for people with what I'm calling story panels. And they're not, I call them story panels because they're not ultimately going to be storyboards. I mean, some of it could be recycled eventually, I'm sure. But what we did was we took the synopsis that we have in the pitch deck, and looking at that, okay, how can we expand this? Like, we have this, how do we tell it visually? We have the text, but now let's illustrate it. And so we came up with about 21 panels for it, at least conceptually. They have yet to be drawn. But that will essentially tell the whole synopsis of the story. The main characters, the world, the plot, all that good stuff. And to me, it becomes a wonderful cheat because instead of having to memorize outright this synopsis when presenting it and stuff like that, I can just look visually at each picture and know of like, okay, this is what I need to say. Like it's a visual cue to prompt me as opposed to just pulling it straight from memory. So those are the things we have, and those are the things that have to be created before mid-May. So a lot of work, but I had an exciting meeting with the animation team to go over it. The story panels themselves are more just pure sketches where, they don't have to have color. They don't have to be fully done outright. The artboards themselves, the idea is to take it from storyboard concept all the way to a finished product as if it was a screenshot from the movie. So that those are a little bit more involved, but there's only 3 of them. The story panels, less involved, but there's around 21 of them, right? So, there's pros and cons to each, but it's exciting to see things progress. And, one of the things I was talking about with our producer, Astoria Hill, is the idea, because she was like, okay, you know what? We were debating the story panels themselves. And I said, because she's of the mindset, sometimes less is more. And I said, of course, sometimes less is more. But I think in the instance of what we're trying to achieve, where we're essentially asking people for the time, if not their money, then we have to show that we're worth being invested in, right? Someone like a Christopher Nolan can pitch something that hasn't been written completely on just like a log line, and I'm sure a studio would buy it, right? Because it's Chris Nolan, he has a proven track record, he's a known entity, he can open a movie, right? That's not us. And so to just pitch an idea, I don't think we'd get very far. We could, but it doesn't necessarily help our chances. And by having all these elements in place, it just shows like, wow, there's really momentum to all of this. And we're investing our time and our money into it, and therefore we're worth investing in. So that's the idea. Now, to Astoria's point, who knows how these meetings go? It could be like a quick luncheon, very informal. It could be all kinds of things. And, we might not use half the stuff that we have available to us. But all the same, I'd like to have things ready, and ultimately it will help in general versus not having them be ready. Because they'll get used somewhere, that's for sure. And I don't like to be wasteful with doing laborious work that is time intensive, cost intensive, and stuff like that. Trust me, but there's purpose behind it. Either way you slice and dice it. Certainly, one of the things that it can be useful for is for Annecy. That is, as I made mention at the top, an animation festival as well as market. And it's a town basically in France, but on the border of Switzerland. And that's in mid-June. And I'm planning to attend. Right now I'm figuring out like logistics of where to stay, where, how should I get there? Should I go to Paris and then take a train? Should I go instead, because it's closer to Switzerland, should I go to Geneva, then take a train from there? So if anyone has insights into the festival itself in terms of the hookups, and not hookups, I'm not necessarily looking for a discount, but just ultimately like the 411 of how to get there, where to stay, and all that. Because like staying in Annecy itself, very costly, right? And I could stay 10 miles away, but I also have to like do my research of, okay, well, how are the trains? I know trains and buses in Europe work regularly, but I just have to like answer these questions so I have outright knowledge, and I'm not like stuck in a town where I have to walk like 10 miles to get to Annecy or something like that. So any information about that would be quite helpful if, for by happenstance, you know France very well or have been to Annecy before. So looking forward to that, and that's what we're planning. As part of the build-up to this, in addition to making these physical assets, we're also rehearsing our pitching. And this primarily is with Astoria. And she's got us on a very aggressive daily schedule, which is good. I actually appreciate her push to really get us ready for this. And it's been fun to do it. Thus far, we've been individually tackling it of okay, if I was presenting alone, how would that look like? If she was presenting alone, how would that look like? And, now we're going to start to marry the two and have it be much more organic, where she can say something and then I can pick it up from there, and just kind of where the two of us are a duo rather than one person speaks and the other person's quiet. We can really just build off each other and create that natural engagement with people, right? So that's what we're looking forward to, and that's what we're building on, each and every day. So a lot of work, lot of work. So yeah. And also, speaking of The Matrix, one of the reasons why that was sort of top of mind, in addition to Lion King behind the scenes, as part of all that, was I went to the Academy Museum, the Academy of Motion Picture and Sciences. I think that's the official title. Forgive me if I'm wrong on that. But anyway, I went to their museum here in Los Angeles. They did a screening of The Matrix Revolutions with kind of a fireside chat with one of the VFX artists, or supervisors rather, of Matrix Reloaded and Matrix Revolutions, along with Lily Wachowski, who is one half of the Wachowskis. And I have to say, it was very interesting to watch, simply because, I feel like Lana Wachowski is much more of, let's say, the articulate verbal sibling versus Lily. Lily, I think, just she's not as well spoken. I'm sure she is brilliant in her own right, and that's probably evidence through writing and stuff like that and whatnot. And I'm sure Lana can pick up the various cues, and they don't have to speak. They can just kind of read each other's minds. But it was a bit of a letdown in that regard to be there as an audience member and not have things be as well as articulated. And it got me to thinking that, if all these years later you're not necessarily able to speak about your own work in a succinct way, how the hell did you pull off pitching this, right? And I mean no disrespect, but pitching something as The Matrix, you can imagine, how the hell do people wrap their minds around it? And that's why I go back to, they had their storyboards, and that's why for us, I'm really pushing these story panels, because in many ways, not that our movie's The Matrix, but there are various elements that are hard to wrap your head around. And so we want to provide the lampposts, as it were, to guide people. So, yeah. Also, I will say, this is my first time seeing The Matrix on a big screen since it came out. Of course, I'd seen the Matrix Revolutions, many times since its release, across, Blu-rays, DVDs, blah, 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 and even VHS. But seeing it on the big screen was just magical again. And yes, it has its flaws that were always there, but a lot more forgivable. Because I think I obviously knew the story, so I just kind of accepted it as it was. But yeah, movies just hit differently in a theater, especially when they're just big spectacles. So visually it definitely held up. Story-wise, I was much more forgiving, but still noted all the complaints about it, yes, they're still there. But it was a fun night for sure. Now, because of all of this, last time I talked about working on my film book and really progressing there. Because of all these things that I'm working on with the Arbiters, that had to take a pause. I'm hoping to resume this weekend, at least partially, just get some momentum back into it because I'll have some time. But yeah, no harm, no foul type of deal. It's all par for the course. The big project for me is the Arbiters. And, one of the big things is I never want people waiting on me, right? So, there's a whole team of preparing a lot of this stuff. And so it's okay, let me make sure they have their marching orders to be able to do the work that they need to do. So they don't, they can do that. They're not waiting on me. And so if that means pausing on a project that just requires me, aka the book, then so be it. You know, luckily that one doesn't have a deadline, right? So it's okay. Now, speaking of books, it's not quite a book per se, but I talked about beginning this manifesting journal in my last vlog. And just as a quick recap, essentially, it's just a notebook where you're supposed to, for at least 1 month, write down 10 things per day that you want to manifest. And you write it in present tense and you assign it a date of when you think it'll happen, just based on instinct. So since then, I've continued this practice. And man, it's been really fun. I'm, let's say, about halfway through. It really does open up your mind, but then also after a certain point, you're like, okay, how many big things can I start to manifest? It almost feels way too selfish to have big ticket items on there every single day. And so part of me starts to write stuff for friends and family that I would love, or smaller aspects. And more so, I find myself putting in there, manifesting feelings and things that are within my control of progress. So not necessarily the outcome, but just things I can literally do and will do. So that way it's not, something like I'm going to win an Oscar. I have some of that stuff definitely early on, but now I've shifted. And I don't know if that's right or wrong. It's just been interesting, when you start to manifest. These are just my observations, right? I'd be curious if you've ever done something similar, after a certain point, how you've reflected upon it. But this is how I'm kind of looking at it. And, who knows after these 30 days where I'll be with it mentally and, what will even come of it. But it's definitely expanded my mind towards opportunities. One of the interesting things that I combined, I was listening to Robert Rodriguez on the Tim Ferriss show. He came back as a guest this year. And I love Robert Rodriguez. I think he's an amazing filmmaker, very inspirational for me. And one of the things that he was talking about was working with his family on all his projects now, essentially. And that's how, they stay close. And that to me is awesome. Something that I thought about and put into the manifestation journal was this idea that my mom is set to retire not too long from now. I don't mean days or weeks or months, but, within a few years. And wouldn't it be cool if, essentially she was somehow involved in my movies, and we got to work with each other that way. It's something that, ironically, she joked about not a little bit ago of I'll be your assistant, stuff like that. And it's like, well, what if I found a way to pay her and have her be my assistant, and stuff like that. We'll see how that would play out, if we would want to stab each other or if it would be a good working relationship. I think ultimately we could find a way to make it work. But yeah. Other quick items that I just want to talk about. So recently I got a chance to do what's called the Grammy Rewind, where they're acceptance speeches from the past. And it's just always interesting to look at kind of the history of all of it and, see who was nominated at the time, who won versus who didn't, and how kind of everyone's career since that time took off, right? Because as implied by the title, it's called Rewind because, they're promoting speeches and awards of the past. So I think the most recent one I ended up working on was from 2002, something like that. So yeah, it's kind of interesting in that respect just to reflect upon it. So that definitely, the work itself, while sort of time consuming isn't really that difficult, but it takes even more time because I just by the nature of working on it, I get a little curious and I start to like go down these many rabbit holes of like, oh, blah blah blah, and oh wow, that came out that year, and blah, whatever it may be. The other interesting aspect of it is whenever there's an award that's presented and someone wins, but they're not there. And in the moment, right, when I watch those award shows, it doesn't feel like a big deal of, let's say, Hayao Miyazaki not being at the Oscars to pick up his award for The Boy and the Heron. Right? You just kind of glance over it and the show goes on, the show continues. But as a standalone piece that you look back through the lens of history, I don't know, I felt a little bit cheated by it. And so I'm not saying awards are the end-all be-all, that we have to, put our stock in it, that, you're not anything if you don't win an award. Certainly that's not what I'm saying. But at the same time, I don't know. I think we need to have these moments of reverence and can have this respect for things, and should show up, So certainly, like, funny enough, it's something that Astoria and I just jokingly talk about every now and then. Would we show up to the award shows and stuff like that? And I think for me, the answer is definitely yes. I would show up, even if I'm nominated, knowing that, like, in my heart of hearts, I'm not going to win. Just to be nominated is awesome, and I would want to be a part of that. What I don't love the idea of is, like, the campaigning of it all, attending these screenings and doing this, like, that's not something. I don't know. It just seems to be so time consuming and draining, and for me, like, just lost time that I would want to put into creating art. But who knows? Maybe I would, and I would enjoy the hell out of it. But I don't know. Anyway, so there was that experience. Also, I discovered this really amazing tiny bookstore near me that's like next to a coffee shop, and I went in there and was like, how do you select the books that you're selling? And they seem to have all these kind of events for authors and stuff like that. And me, having written 2 books thus far, fiction and nonfiction, and now working on this film book, and slowly but surely working on a second fiction book, I was like, it'd be cool to, like, do a book launch there, right? Whenever that may be, and stuff like that. So I talked to them about how it works and stuff like that, and see, it seems very awesome. Just very easy breezy, like, hey, let's do it type of thing, which is cool. I really appreciate that. Another thing that has happened in the past few weeks, Emerson College, my college where I went to, every year in LA they do 6 in 60. It's a film festival where essentially you see 6 films within 60 minutes. Now, it's not always 60 minutes, but luckily this year it was. And I have to say, like, the 6 films this year really were quite incredible. Not that the other ones weren't in the years past, but I just think shorter and comedic sort of lends itself more to, at least my sensibilities, for a more enjoyment. Or if you're going to do a drama, I think, in terms of a short film, it really has to either be good to justify a length, or you just go 5 minutes with it and that's it. And this year, a lot of the movies were very comedic, and a lot of the movies were, none of them were over 10 minutes, I don't think. And so it made it really, really enjoyable. Some really great stuff. I loved, afterwards, there's a reception. So my girlfriend and I, we got to meet the various filmmakers, at least some of them, and kind of chat with them and whatnot, and see what they're working on now. And I just love that. I love those connections and really championing people. So that was a lot of fun. And that week in itself was what I call Emerson Week, because we did that in LA, and then there was an Emerson soccer alumni event in Boston. So it's been a while since I went back to Boston, and my girlfriend and we decided to make a trip of it, go for the weekend, and that was a lot of fun. Not as many people from my classes. In fact, nobody. There was someone above my class who came, and I had heard a lot about him, but it was great to get to know him a little bit more. And then it was a lot of recent graduates in terms of the alumni, and we essentially played against the current roster. And then afterwards, the alumni, along with the coaches, went out to a bar, had food, drinks, and just chatted. It was, in that perspective, I was bummed that I didn't see and reunite with people that I knew, but at the same time, it was wonderful to get to know these younger kids and see, what they're up to, and kind of help mentor them in ways that I could, and just form those connections and those bonds. Like that was really cool. Boston ended up being very cold, unfortunately. It was supposed to be very rainy. Luckily, it only drizzled here and there, so it wasn't terrible in that respect. But still, it was a worthwhile trip. It was a fun trip. I'm glad we went. So yeah, a lot of fun there. Only to come back to, come Monday, there was the earthquake in San Diego. And never in my life have I gotten a notification on my phone of like, hey, earthquake warning. Like I thought it was an Amber Alert. It wasn't. It just said, hey, earthquake warning, duck, do all that stuff. And where I'm at, that wasn't happening. There was no sense of the earthquake. But, in that initial moment, you're kind of looking at it and be like, okay. And then you follow the actions like, okay, how long do I continue this action for? When is the earthquake coming? And then you kind of start to research of like, okay, well, what's actually happening, and stuff like that. And we're only talking minutes, but nonetheless, it's quite an experience. And some people that I know experienced the reverberations of it where they were at. I have a friend down in Orange County. She experienced, a good chunk of it. And luckily, it wasn't bad. It was terrifying in the sense that it was just long, right? But from what I understand, what I do know is that everyone that I know is safe, and no damage was done. And, some people even in San Diego, same thing, like scary, but luckily they're safe. So I've yet to hear otherwise. If I'm wrong about that, I apologize. One of my big components of this year is just, not that I'm ignoring the world, but is to focus on the people that I know and that they know, and just creating this community, for lack of a better term, to make sure that we're all okay. And, beyond that, it's not that I don't care, but it's, I'm putting my effort into those people, and, literally spent like half the day making sure that, people were good. And even just to that effect, touching base with coworkers and being like, hey, did you feel that? Anyone else okay, and stuff like that. So that's how I approach these situations. It's kind of how I approached the LA wildfires, which, in and of themselves, like, it's back to business as usual for me and a lot of people. However, for a lot of people, that is not the reality. And so I've talked about that not too long ago, but yeah, that still obviously continues to be a reality. And the idea of rebuilding, this isn't an overnight thing. It's not going to take a few months. Like, for some people, it could be a reality of a few years, which is very unfortunate. And, I don't know how you help that beyond just knowing that and continuing to do work day by day, as opposed to, one and done, right? Activism is not just a one-day thing for anything that you choose to be an activist within. So yeah, that's the main stuff that's been happening, that's going on in my mind. Thank you as always for taking the time to tune in. I truly do appreciate you. Hope it helps you in some way. As always, you are welcome to ask any questions about the stuff that I talked about or anything that you would like me to discuss in the future. I love to cater my episodes as much as possible to make sure that you get something out of them. Also, before I fully wrap out, I would like to point your attention to my Patreon page where you get like various behind the scenes exclusives, like templates of things that I have. Maybe I'll post some early renditions of these various things. So just a nice, fun, insight look into all of this. There's only one tier. It's $10 a month. That way everyone gets everything. And also, part of the perk is that you get monthly group coaching as part of that. So that alone could be worth it. Then I also have been publishing weekly on my Substack. And, that's various articles that take what I'm talking about, expand it, tie it more specifically into how you can apply it in your life and give you prompts to put those ideas into action. Because that's the most important part of all of it at the end of the day. Anyway, as I said, I truly do appreciate you, and I hope to see you next time.